Welcome to this session. In this session, we will discuss very briefly the concept of enlightenment. And we are discussing this concept of enlightenment not to go deeper into its philosophical or ideological background, but to understand how enlightenment functioned as a very important background or as a very important factor for the emergence of sociology as a distinct social science discipline in the 18th and 19th century Europe. So, a set of new ideas, a set of new political, economic and cultural processes, and a demanding new social reality. All these are important factors behind the emergence of any social science discipline, and sociology was the case of sociology was not an exception. So, one of the most important intellectual changes or ideological changes that happened in Europe is widely described by this term European Enlightenment. And there are very fascinating discussions and debates about the European Enlightenment, to what extent they kind of heralded a true idea of human emancipation, and how did different civilizations had, or whether other civilizations had anything similar to this idea of enlightenment, what were the kind of internal contradictions of enlightenment, how did enlightenment view certain practices like racism or slavery, or how many of these champions of enlightenment were heavily racists. So, it's a very fascinating area of fascinating aspect to look into the kind of discussions and debates about enlightenment. So, enlightenment emerged in the wake of scientific revolutions of the 16th and 17th century, which challenged the dominant philosophical and religious vision of the universe. You know that the rise of science, the Copernicus, Galileo and a number of important scientists, they altered the widely held views and belief systems about the universe, about the nature of the universe, its creation, its functioning, and the role of earth, role of sun, and the importance of human beings, because all these explanations were very convincingly provided by the most powerful religious institution, the Roman Catholic Church. And as I mentioned in one of the previous classes, an institution like Catholic Church or any religious theology has a very convincing answer. It has its own rationality. It does not say that the religion does not know the answer to any question. It can answer any question. So, Christianity explained the origin of man, the creation of man. It explained the creation of the universe, the creation of the world. So, it had very convincing answers, and through its institutions, it very systematically imposed these ideas and this set of knowledge across the centuries over on the population. So, one of the most important figures, or one of the most important noted scientists who challenged this argument was, of course, Copernicus, with his argument about heliocentrism, which went against the biblical or the Catholic argument or the Christian argument that the earth is the center of the universe. Because the church argued that earth is the center of the universe, and all other planets including the sun are revolving around the earth, because earth is the place where human beings inhabit. And human beings are the most precious creations of God. So, everything revolves around the earth, the geocentric argument. And it was Copernicus who argued that this is a fallacy, rather the earth is revolving around the sun. And then comes Galileo Galilei, who through his systematic study argued, through his observation through telescope, argued that indeed Copernicus was right. Indeed, earth is one among the several satellites that revolve around the sun, and there is nothing distinct, or there is nothing special about earth. Earth is one among different planets that revolve the sun. And that, as the students of science know that that created quite a lot of controversy, because these arguments were seen as heretical, they were seen as against the teaching of Bible, they were seen as against the teaching of Christianity, and that was punishable. So if you, at that particular time, if you were to talk about a new idea that went against the teachings of Bible or went against the teaching of Christianity, you could be punished. And Galileo was subjected to so much of pressure, so much of intimidation, so much of threat, and they constituted an inquisition committee by the church, and he was examined, and he was asked to go back from his argument about heliocentrism. And this is a very interesting statement of this inquisitorial commission of the Catholic Church, declared heliocentrism to be a foolish and absurd philosophy and formally heretical, since it explicitly contradicts in many places the sense of Holy Scripture. And what you are reading or what you just read is some of the very important moments in the human history, where one of the most fundamental lessons of human science is being ridiculed as foolish and absurd philosophy, because it goes against the Holy Scripture. So the Holy Scripture, the Bible, was seen as the ultimate knowledge. It was seen as the source of ultimate knowledge system of the whole universe. So nobody was allowed to question that. Nobody was allowed to say anything contradictory to the arguments or the suggestions of the Holy Scripture. And Galileo was subjected to this inquisition. He was found guilty. He was punished, and the punishment was to retract from all his arguments, and then and initially he was punished for imprisonment, and later it was reduced to house arrest till his death, and he died in his house. And there is a very interesting story that even when this sentence was given, he said, or he mentioned in a very mute voice, that "and yet it moves." And this is supposed to be a very important episode. And yet it moves, yet the earth moves around the sun, arguing that your judgment or your punishment on me will not stop that. This is the truth, and you can't cover it or you can't erase it for long. So enlightenment is not only, while it derived its source from the scientific revolutions, and especially again after Copernicus and Galileo, then the whole intervention of Charles Darwin, who again revolutionized this whole idea about the evolution of human beings, that completely went against the teachings of Bible, which completely went against the teachings of Christianity, which established that human beings were the most special creations of God. Human beings were created, and the woman was created from the rib of the man. So these belief systems which were perpetuated, which were believed, which were perpetuated, disseminated, institutionalized for the past so many centuries, were now refuted. They were challenged by this man Charles Darwin through his work his work on evolution, who could convincingly argue on the basis of evidences that human beings were not created all on a sudden. Every species, every animal and plant species in this world are the product of a process called evolution, and there is nothing divine about it. So these scientific discoveries completely shook the foundation of religious explanation of knowledge, and this particular development played a very important and pivotal role in the emergence of sociology as a discipline. So the Enlightenment is often seen as a march of progress, as the rise of reason and the science overcoming the superstitions of Middle Ages. So this is a very important point, because we talk about this concept of reason and science and it trying to overcome the superstitions of Middle Ages. So a group of intellectuals began to emerge in Europe, arguing that many of the hitherto held belief systems, especially sanctioned or propagated by religion, about the universe, about human beings, about the world, are nothing but superstitions, unfounded beliefs. And these unfounded beliefs need to be replaced with the knowledge that can be produced, or knowledge that is produced by reason and science. So you see the decline of a particular paradigm, you see the decline of a religious paradigm as an explanatory platform, and you see the emergence of science and reason as an alternative platform, as an alternative system of knowledge. And so the kind of a conflict between religion and science becomes very, very important during this particular period, and that later led to the decline of religion, what is very famously known in sociological literature as the secularization, how religion lost its significance in the public sphere, in the society, in politics, in social aspects, in everything. So this is seen as a fundamental conflict between science and religion, and the explanatory potential of religion as a paradigm to explain about the worldly things, about the universe, was very significantly dented by the rise of science and reason. And these scholars argued for the use of reason to analyze and understand the universe and the world around them, rather than blindly accepting the reasoning of religion and tradition. So you know that this religion and tradition, there is a very close connection between religion and tradition. Every religion, there is something called as a religious tradition, a set of rules and practices which are supposedly considered to be constant, which supposedly contain some of the most essential elements of this religion. So many of these traditions were protected. They were kind of considered to be very, very important and essential because they were religiously sanctioned. You could not change them. So challenging these traditions, so challenging the religion, was considered to be a major offense. It was considered to be a sin. So against all these widely felt or widely believed systems and convictions, now there are a set of people who argue that you need to use reason and to analyze and understand the universe and the world around them, rather than blindly accepting the reasoning of religion and tradition. So a new perception of an orderly universe, which was governed by natural laws of motion and gravity rather than spirit. Science could grasp these laws in mathematical form. There was no need for a divine purpose to explain the working of nature. The natural world became subject to humankind's prediction and will. This realization was a moment of tremendous sense of empowerment. This particular realization that there are natural laws, and these natural laws are the ones which are governing the planetary motions and the universe, and we can make sense of them, we can understand them. And in order to understand them, we don't need to depend upon the clergy, we don't need to depend upon the priests, we don't need to depend upon the so-called holy books. They are of very limited or no use at all in order to understand how the universe functions. And the natural world becomes a subject of humankind's prediction and will. You can predict how the world will evolve. You can understand a lot of things, and from this understanding you can move on, try to control a lot of things. And this was a moment of tremendous sense of empowerment, a new sense of power, new sense of knowledge that you have. You can use your intellect, you can use your intelligence, you can use your wisdom in order to make sense of the world, because there are laws, natural laws, which are intelligible to human beings, and by understanding these natural laws you can deal with them better. And thereby it was an open call to argue that the religion is of very limited use. Maybe religion has some relevance when it comes to the questions of spirituality, individual issues, or organizing the social aspects, but more than that, the religious contribution to understand the world and the universe, the relevance of religion in the realm of science was seen as either minimal or almost nil. Now, so that led to the commitment to the idea of an empirical science. As we mentioned in the previous session. And empiricism talks about the ability of human beings to understand his world around him or her through the senses. A reliable understanding of the world, they insisted, could only be attained through experience, observation and experimentation. Some of the most fundamental components of science, some of the most important features of science. You observe, you experience, you collect data, you classify them, and you experiment with them, and you prove the hypothesis, and then you come to the kind of a conclusion. So this scientific method, the combination of positivism and empiricism, were widely heralded as the most suitable or perhaps the only way of understanding the world. And that again, resulted in a major tussle, major conflict with the Roman Catholic Church, because it came as a very, very serious challenge to the existing position or existing power relations of Roman Catholic Church. Because as you know, Roman Catholic Church was not only a religious institution, it was also a political institution. So a combination of these two deadly forces of religious knowledge or religious power as well as political power made Roman Catholic Church an extremely powerful institution. So it was not very easy to fight the influence of Roman Catholic Church, but soon it became very clear that the church has very little to offer to resist or to criticize this emergence of this particular kind of an argument, especially the role of church explanation in the field of science. So now what are the consequences of these scientific revolutions into the field of society, or how did this emergence of reasoning and empiricism and a kind of a scientific methodology, or the newfound sense of empowerment that you can understand the world by your own senses, your own intellect, how did it influence the society, or how did it influence social sciences? So these philosophers were practical social reformers, seeking knowledge above all for the sake of its utility. They were confident that the findings of science could be employed to improve human condition. So there was an argument, or there was a rather consensus that you can improve the conditions of humanity. Okay? You can make the lives of people far better. You can uplift the living standards of people. You can make them more free. You can emancipate. Yes, the word emancipation is the most important one. These people, these scholars, these philosophers, they dreamt about emancipation of large populations. They argued that these people can be free of their shackles. These people can be free of their chains. Because that was the time, the transition from the medieval period, medieval feudalism, to that of capitalism. Vast sections of people were under bondages of feudalism. And many of these philosophers believed that vast majority of people were under the chains of religion, under the chains of church, who were blindly following certain unfounded principles. So they argued that this scientific revolution can be used for the betterment of people. There was a major concern about the betterment of human beings. There was a major concern about elevating the stature of human beings, to make them lead a far better life, about emancipation of humankind. So this vision implied a conception of the world as malleable, capable of being rearranged to align more closely with the dictates of reason and the requirements of human welfare, commitment to a better society and ideas of progress. So as I told you, this empowerment tells you, this feeling of empowerment gives you the possibility of changing the world as per your ideas. And this comes against many of the teachings of the church, or many of the teachings of almost every religion, which argues that the world is like this because God created like that. You are suffering because God wants you to suffer. You are suffering from poverty, you are suffering from illness, you are suffering from oppression, because that is how it is. So quite a lot of theological explanations about human suffering, quite a lot of theological explanations about exploitation, about these different classes. Some people consider it to be the most noble and most the elite group, and vast majority of them are suffering under them. This kind of social order was seen as divinely sanctioned. It was seen as ordered by the God. Now, this new argument that you can change the society as per your conviction, as per your reason, it completely challenged these arguments of religion, especially that of Christianity. This sense of empowerment informed not only the intellectuals but also the ordinary people that the world is malleable. You can shape it the way you want. You can fashion it the way you want. You can orient it the way you want. And you can create a more better society. You can create a more humane society. You can create a society where inequality is at its minimum. You can create a society where large number of people do not suffer in their everyday life. So this sense of idea, because it emerges from the argument that the world can be understood by your human consciousness, your human intellect. So that provided a major impetus to the study of society. It gave so much of momentum, it gave so much of enthusiasm to not only to the philosophers who led this movement, but also it slowly percolated down to the ordinary population. So a group of philosophers including Voltaire, Rousseau, David Hume, Adam Smith, John Locke and Immanuel Kant, a number of them. The list of Enlightenment thinkers are very, very long. I have just selectively put very important numbers. So these scholars include, say, political scientists and philosophers, Voltaire, Rousseau, David Hume, Adam Smith and David Hume, they were economists, and Immanuel Kant is a philosopher. So it's a group of scholars cutting across disciplines. They had so much of things to share. They all agreed upon some of the most important arguments that the existing world order, existing situation can be changed for something better. And of course, they were not very clear about what is this kind of a particular better, but there was an idea that we can definitely take the society to a far better position. So most philosophers, especially in terms of political science, they tend to be utilitarians, rather in that they thought that everyone has natural desire to maximize pleasure and minimize pain, and this very significantly informed the emergence of economic theories during this particular time. So there is nothing wrong in trying to maximize the pleasure and to minimize the pain, and we need to enter, or human beings need to enter into some kind of a contractual agreement, the rise of contract theory, social contract theory. So many economists advocated the elimination of the government and customary regulation of the economy, allowing the free market through the invisible hand, Adam Smith, to maximize everyone's self-interest and the good of society as a whole. So the economics philosophy, especially of David Hume and then Adam Smith, comes from this kind of an argument that the government, especially in that particular time, the monarchical or dictatorial kind of government must recede, must lose its significance. The market must be allowed to freely work as per its own logic, as per its own dynamics, so that the people are able to pursue their passion, people are able to fulfill their desires, and their self-interest is fulfilled, and as a whole it is good for the society. And you will find its implication in political science with the rise of social contract theory, where the basic argument is that if everybody needs to live together, they need to have certain kind of contract with each other and also with the state. So you see this new kind of consciousness about the world, new kind of understanding about the world in which we live, about the universe, that had enormous implications about every distinct field of life, whether it is political or social or economic or philosophical. There was no sphere of society that was untouched by the arguments of enlightenment. So enlightenment, as I told you, it's a very brief introduction to this huge fascinating topic, but I hope that must have given you some rough idea about how enlightenment functioned as a catalyst in the emergence of sociology as a new science. So we will wind up here and then meet you for the next class. Thank you.